Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel where we rank, review, trailer react, and talk about news on movies, TV shows, and video games. Welcome back to the last 4 videos I'm going to be uploading on Spider-Man month. So the first out of these last 4 videos will indeed be Spider-Man the new animated series reviewing the show. This show premiered back in 2003 and well, to develop a little backstory on it, after the poorly received Unlimited series, because well back in that time, as many of you know, there have been several Spider-Man cartoons. The first ever Spider-Man cartoon content to be ever produced on television was indeed the 60s cartoon that's been known to be memeified within memes that ran from the late 60s all the way into the 70s. Then there was the Spider-Woman show that continued the series on, the 60s show, with even the original actor Paul Schumer, who voiced the Spider-Man in the 60s show, reprising the role in the show. Then the Spider-Man 80s show with Todd Schumer, who played Spider-Man in this weird-looking 80s show, and then Dan Gilderzan, who voiced Spider-Man in the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Both the show from the Amazing Friends and the 80s one that had the same animation styles and pretty much premiered around the same time. Dan Gilderzan, the voice actor of the show of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, even got to reprise the role of Spider-Man, but plays Spider-Man 2099 in Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. Next after that was Spider-Man the Animated Series, one of the most iconic Spider-Man cartoons of its time, and even now, and it was voiced by Christopher Daniel Barnes, who again reprised his role twice in Spider-Man media, as the Spider-Man Noir of Shattered Dimensions, and as 2099 Spider-Man of Edge of Time. After that, there was Spider-Man Unlimited, voice played by Rina Romano, who did indeed reprise the role 2 more times for 2 Spider-Man games in the 2000 and 2001. The 2001 game being infamous for getting a redo. More on that will be explained in you can go watch my 9/11 speech video that explains a bit, goes a bit more explaining on that. But yeah, so while Unlimited was in production, since it was being made, the Raimi film was also being made. The iconic Spider-Man film by Sony was also in production, and Avi Arad and the studio told them they couldn't make any original Spider-Man cartoons, so they took it into space, and that just failed. It only got 1 season left on a cliffhanger, and that show ended. Now let's get to the origin of this show. The Ultimate Spider-Man comics made in the early 2000s were hits, and they wanted a show to represent that. So since the original Spider-Man the Animated Series cartoon focused on the comics, because whereas the 60s cartoon focused on the classic Spider-Man era, like its early years, and so did Spider-Woman focused on a unique corner of Spider-Man series, along with the 80s shows focused on different areas of Spider-Man's mythos, and the 90s show focusing on classic bits of his character and more classic comic book storylines, especially the 90s and 80s comics. Well, this cartoon decided to follow more the Ultimate Comics route, and it was going to be more different, and the designs would look similar to the Ultimate Comics one. So, the show was going to be made Ultimate Spider-Man, but around that time, in 2002, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man was released in the cinemas, and the film was a smash hit. Since they knew that it would attract more fans both of the comics and of the movies if they used the movie for success of the first movie, it would get fans into this new animated series TV show. So, they altered the show to be set after the first Spider-Man film. Now you're probably wondering, hey, does it have any links to the second and third film? No, it does not at all have any links to those, because on the show, spoiler alert, Dr. Curtis Connors does indeed die during his first appearance on the show, and then he appears in Spider-Man 2 and alive and well, and then a bunch of other characters appear and then die. Some of the other ones do appear, but they're not supposed to line up, like Indy, Peter's girlfriend during the show, ends up in the series, but then she'll disappear for Spider-Man 2, so that wouldn't make sense. So yeah, it wouldn't make sense for those two to be melded back together. But nonetheless, the show got 13 episodes and was produced by MTV. So MTV was able to procure the rights for Spider-Man the Animated Series and be able to produce it, and got a very famous company, Mainframe Entertainment, to do it, because they had previously worked on Transformers Beast Wars and Transformers Beast Machines. And since those 2 shows have been mildly successful in their animation, they were awarded for their animation, they decided to hire them for a Spider-Man cartoon. And so with getting Mainframe on board to produce and do animation for the show, with MTV as producers, along with Sony and Marvel Cartoons backing it up with some money, and nonetheless, this meant they could get in motion. And this movie, they decided to cast different actors, not the actors from the film, since that would have been way too expensive. So they went with the next day's scene. Instead of Tobey Maguire, Neil Patrick Harris, who was an amazing Peter Parker. Is he the best Spider-Man voice actor? No, but he is one of the best. He's one of the best interpretations and voice actors for his character. But yeah, the show was a massive hit, and the show was a sort of weird take on the character. It was more mature, it took a more darker tone, and it was much more serious. Like, it even had different villains. Like in the first episode, Turbojet was there, and yeah, most of the time it only referenced the first film, and it was meant to get more seasons. So we're gonna get Vulture, Shocker, and more classic villains like Mysterio and even Venom. But that never happened because the show was cancelled after one season. So what was the show like? We'll find out in this review. Now, let's start off with the good. The good part is the story. I think, in my opinion, the story is amazingly well told. The episodes feel standalone. I like the standalone feel they give to the story. The standalone feel makes you feel different. It's different from ones that came before it and ones that came after it. In my opinion, to be a Spider-Man fan, you gotta sometimes look at the diverse areas. Now, I'm not a big comic reader. I haven't really read a massive amount of the comics. To be honest, I've only met a few comics around the Spider-Man's character. I've read a few of the original ones from the 60s. I've read a few of the modern day ones, but not many of the comics. I've only watched all the movies so far, and some of the TV shows like Marvel Spider-Man and Venom, Ultimate Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, and now Tenace. I knew that if I wanted to see the continuation at YouTube that a crew that a bunch of good fans are doing, then I thought, why not watch the show that they're basing this sequel series off. Now, the story is amazing. Overall, I can just say the story is brilliantly well told, and I think, yeah, it just told such a unique story of a story that made it so different. The tone, again, was very different. The way the story's tone was, it was very dark, but could be lighthearted, but most of the time it was dark, and I think that's one of the reasons why it got low ratings. Now, most people do not know what MTV was. Even as a kid, I heard of it, but I never really exactly knew what it meant. Like, as a kid, I thought, what's an MTV? And even as when I first heard of it, I only heard of it because, well, my mom mentioned MTV once or twice when I was like 4 or 5 years old. And then when I first saw this at around 11 years old, when I first saw the videos for Evan Falasha, who's a big Spider-Man Tenace fan, or the new animated series, he mentioned that it was MTV. And I really wondered, because I had not heard their name in a long time, I thought, what's an MTV? And then I realized it was a TV studio. It was apparently all the rage back in the day, and this show was meant for young adults, not children. Although the marketing for it looked like it was marketed towards children, and the looks of the characters looked very cartoonish. Yes, the CGI looked great for the time, and it still looks decent now, but it has a bit age to it. You can tell by the look of the show, the way that people dress, it's a bit of an aged show. So it's a bit aged. You can tell it's set right in 2003 due to the looks of the characters and the way they act, and they really set it within 2003. Yeah, overall, the tone of the story is very unique. We never seen anything like this, but overall, the show, I think that could have done good had it gone more seasons. So yeah, unique villains. Now, the ones I can name off the top of my head, I believe the ones he fights within throughout this entire series is, I believe, these villains. Obviously, the first villain he fought was the Green Goblin from Spider-Man 2002, but since he's dead, these are the villains he fights within the animated series show, the new animated series. First is Turbojet. Second is the Biker Twins, then the Lizard, then Electro, then Shakata, then Silver Sable, Kraven the Hunter, Pterodax, Kingpin, and Talon, along with the Gaines Twins. They also were many of the baddies. This isn't an order, but these are many of the baddies. And yes, this was a really good show. Some of the villains were weird. They did bring in classic villains like Lizard and Electro, although they both died. Kraven the Hunter and Sable were both classic villains, including Kingpin. Now, here's the thing. The Kingpin, of those who watch the show, Kingpin's black. Now, I don't have a photo to show you, but he's Black Kingpin. Now, why was he like this? To tie it in with the 2003 Daredevil film that was released at the time with Ben Affleck's Daredevil. Now, I'm not surprised that they couldn't get Daredevil on the show, considering Fox owned the character at the time, which meant they owned all rights, so they couldn't give him over. But since Kingpin was both a villain of Spider-Man and Daredevil, they could use Kingpin. So this tied into the events of the show. It's likely Kingpin after the events of the very first Daredevil film. Now, Besides that, the show's alright. I think it has a very unique story. The villains are so different from the ones you're used to seeing in a classic Spider-Man show. Whilst they bring back classic villains, they gave them new takes on the characters. Some stuck with me, some didn't. The style was weird, but I still found it very unique. And again, another thing is the new takes on the characters. They're so unique and vibrant. Like, one thing they do well is they actually reference the Raimi film, because how can you do that? Number one. Well, first, the characters aren't the same ones we see in the Raimi films. Another thing is that the arcs they had from the Raimi film is finished in that first film, and was supposed to be continued, but since this is a show, they start with a completely new one, but continues partially the original one. Plus, they don't, obviously, it's pretty obvious, they don't look at all like the actors. Heck, first of all, Harry Osborn looks nothing like James Franco. He has freaking blonde hair. And MJ, Lisa Loeb's MJ, the animated version she voiced, looks nothing like Kirsten Dunst one. They did keep the red hair though, and well, Peter Parker obviously looks more. They all look more like their ultimate counterparts because that's who they're based on. But nonetheless, since you can't base it off that, you can only reference the first film. So Norman Osborn is often referenced in the episode The Law of the Jungle, which is Evan Falash's favorite video. And it's his favorite episode because it ties back to the first Raimi film. And although, yes, I believe he'd be more variant of the Tobey's Peter, I technically did grow up with him, but when you mean grow up, it means you've watched it before. You can't count that as a technicality. Like, I did know this Peter existed. Now, I did know he existed. It's like when I heard of Karate Kid. I knew Karate Kid, the original one with Daniel LaRusso, did exist years ago. So did the Tanash show. I knew this existed, but I never bothered watching it because I didn't want to. I was like 4 or 5, so I'd rather watch Spectacular Spider-Man, which was the only cartoon around when I was a kid. Then they had Ultimate Spider-Man and kind of, yeah. But the show, yeah, the new takes on the characters is very unique. The duality of Peter's character is handled better than most of the other versions we've seen of the character. Like, if Spider-Man wins, Peter Parker loses. If Peter Parker wins, Spider-Man loses. The Spider-Man 1 film set this up perfectly. So, like, whereas Spider-Man wins, he gets an awesome amount of attention, whereas Peter Parker loses Uncle Ben. And then another thing is that when he killed Uncle Ben's killer, well, he thought he did, Dennis Carey, he thought it was good for Peter because, well, he killed the guy who killed Uncle Ben. It was bad for Spider-Man. It was good for Spider-Man. He took down the bad guy, but it was bad for Peter because, well, yeah, practically at that point they both lost. But it's many things, like at the end of Spider-Man 1, when he chooses not to be with Mary Jane. Spider-Man wins. Now he has to keep, MJ is now safe and Peter can continue being a superhero. He's now a stronger hero. But that's sad and Peter Parker loses because now he can't have the girl of his dreams. And they really continue there. And I hope they continue this thrilling bit in this Tenace continued that they're working on, that fans are working on. And I hope they do this. The new takes on these characters, even Indy and Harry and a bunch of them are very unique. Like, Harry isn't over-explosively hating Spider-Man. He does it slowly, and it kind of slowly drives him. Like, I think if the show does get continued, I think we'll see the progression of Harry's slow drifting into being the CEO of Oscorp, and the slow downfall of Peter's friendship with Harry, and the slow downfall of the fact that since Norman Osborn's a Green Goblin and Peter can't tell Harry that it will deteriorate their friendship, Harry thinks Spider-Man killed his father. So yeah, and I really thought that was something unique, and I thought that was so unique to do with the character, and the unique takes they did on them. The acting is also very great. I think the acting, like I said, is already very great. The action is nonetheless very smooth and nice, well done. It's a very good action, I think, in my opinion. It feels explosive, it feels actiony, and yeah. Then in the middle, now, the only thing I can say is the CGI animation. It obviously, I'm not putting it in the bad, but I'm not judging the show. That's why I put it in the middle. The reason is, one, the animation hasn't aged that well. It has aged a tiny bit. It looks good, but it's aged a tiny bit. Number two, it was from 2003, so I can't judge something that was released 18 years ago. I can't judge something like that from a show that's 18 years old. So yeah, this show overall, what do I give it? I give it a 9 out of 10. Well, no, I'd say, yeah, 9 out of 10. It's a good show, and I think, like I said, the story, the tone, the unique villains, the new takes on characters, the acting, the action, the CGI, the way the stories are told, the voice acting, it's all great. And in my opinion, this is all what makes it good, and overall, yeah. Now, why is the 1 point taken off I don't know. Maybe I'll figure it out later. And as many may know who are fans of the show, or those who don't know, the show, since it was unfortunately cancelled, has not been revived. But a group of fans, there are actually two groups of fans, are working on continuations. The one I'm very interested in is Tanas Continued, or the new animated series Continued. This focuses on Nero and a bunch of writers helping to revitalize the show with new animation that's been updated, but they need money and to help it. So donate to that. I don't have a link in the description down below, but yeah, it's a great thing, and all 13 episodes will indeed be available on YouTube, and they'll be all free. So yeah, it'd be very awesome to see what the continuation will do with the fans, and it would look apparently good, because the composer of it did indeed say that with all the finished and polished animation, the soundtrack and the sound effects and the voice acting, all looks great, which leads me to believe is some of the episodes are indeed finished. They just need a bit of finishing. Yeah, but overall, yes, that was my review on Spider-Man, the new animated series, made in 2003 and only got one season with 13 episodes. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below, and get ready for the third to last video, the review on Spectacular Spider-Man Season 1 and 2. Okay, I'll see you guys later. Make sure to like and subscribe, people. Just click that notification bell. Okay?